There are experiences that challenge everything we know about reality. Moments when the veil between the visible and invisible tears, revealing truths that humanity is not yet ready to fully accept. This is the story of Margaret Holloway, a woman of 73 years who holds a secret capable of transforming our understanding of God, the universe, and our own existence. In the quiet town of Cascade Falls, Oregon, in the Cascade Mountains, where mist dances among the centennial pines and silence whispers ancient mysteries, Margaret lived an experience that would change not only her life, but her soul forever. What she is about to reveal may sound impossible. It may challenge your deepest beliefs, but sometimes the most extraordinary truth hides behind what we consider fantasy. And before we begin this story, leave your like and comment below where you're watching from. We have a goal to reach of 10 subscribers. I would really appreciate your help in reaching this goal. Thank you so much, everyone. Now let's get to this incredible story. Margaret Holloway had always been a down-to-earth woman. At 73 years old, her silver hair reflected decades of experience as a physics teacher at the local high school in Cascade Falls. Widowed for 15 years, she had raised her 2 children alone, Thomas and Evangeline, who now lived in Portland with their own families. Margaret's house was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by 3 acres of forest. It was a rustic wooden construction, with a large porch where she used to drink her chamomile tea every night, observing the stars through her amateur telescope. That had been her sacred ritual since her husband Robert had died of cancer in 2009. "The stars connect me with him," she used to tell the neighbors. "I know it sounds silly, but I feel that Robert is somewhere up there watching over me." At that time, Margaret was skeptical about anything that couldn't be explained by science. She attended the Cascade Falls Methodist Church on Sundays, more out of tradition and sense of community than true faith. For her, God was an abstract concept, a moral force that kept society cohesive, not a real and palpable presence, but all that would change on the night of August 23rd, 2023. That Friday had been especially hot for Oregon standards. Margaret spent the day organizing her materials for the new school year that would begin in September. At night, after a simple dinner of Caesar salad and garlic bread, she went out to the porch with her steaming cup of tea. The sky was particularly clear. The Milky Way stretched like a luminous scar across the infinite darkness. Margaret adjusted her telescope, aiming toward the constellation of Orion, always her favorite. The aroma of pines mixed with the smell of tea created an atmosphere of profound peace. That's when she noticed something strange, a light. Not an ordinary star, but something that moved irregularly, zigzagging through the night sky. Margaret frowned, adjusting her glasses on her nose. Airplanes didn't move that way. Satellites had predictable trajectories. That was different. Probably a drone, she muttered to herself, trying to rationalize the phenomenon. But the light began to approach. And quickly, very quickly. What initially seemed the size of a distant star now grew in the sky, becoming larger, brighter. Margaret felt her heart accelerate. A strange sensation took hold of her body, as if every cell vibrated at a different frequency. The air around her seemed to become denser, charged with static electricity that made the hairs on her arms stand up. The teacup slipped from her hands, shattering on the wooden floor of the porch. The light was now directly above her house, enormous and pulsating. It wasn't a single light, but hundreds of them, forming an impossible geometric pattern. Circles within circles, spirals that intertwined in a hypnotic dance. The colors changed constantly. Deep blue, vibrant violet, shimmering gold, emerald green. Margaret wanted to run, but her feet seemed glued to the ground. She wanted to scream, but her voice was stuck in her throat. A paralysis took hold of her entire body, but strangely, it wasn't frightening. It was peaceful, as if something inside her recognized that presence. "What is happening to me?" she thought, her scientific mind struggling to process the impossible. The light pulsed once, twice, 3 times. And then, the world disappeared. When Margaret opened her eyes again, she was no longer on her porch. She was floating. No, not exactly floating. It was more like her body had no weight, as if gravity itself had become optional. The environment around her was white, but not an ordinary white. It was a luminous white, almost translucent, that seemed to emanate from all directions at once, with no visible source. Margaret tried to move her arms and found she could. She tried to turn her head and succeeded. The paralysis had disappeared, but fear still pulsed through her veins. Where was she? How had she gotten there? And more importantly, how to get out? Don't be afraid, Margaret Holloway. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't exactly an audible voice, but more a presence that manifested directly in her mind. It was soft, musical, full of harmonics that seemed to resonate at frequencies she had never experienced before. Margaret spun, searching for the source. And then she saw a figure materialized before her. It didn't appear suddenly, but gradually, as if emerging from another dimension. It was humanoid, but clearly not human. The skin was translucent, with a soft glow that resembled mother of pearl. The eyes were large, almond-shaped, completely black, but in them there was something Margaret could only describe as infinite compassion. The creature was approximately 1 meter and 80 centimeters tall, with elongated and delicate limbs. It wore no clothes, but its body was covered by patterns of light that flowed like bioluminescent circuits under the translucent skin. It was impossible to determine a gender. The entity transcended such categorizations. What? Who are you? Margaret finally managed to articulate, her voice trembling. I am known by many names in many worlds, the presence responded. But you can call me Azariel. I am a guardian, a messenger, a brother in the cosmic journey of consciousness. Margaret felt her legs weaken, but remembered she was floating, with no ground beneath her feet. Is this real? Am I dreaming? Or did I die? A sound emerged from Azariel. It was almost like laughter, but gentler, more melodic. You are more alive now than you have ever been, Margaret. This meeting has been awaited for a long time. Your soul asked for answers, and the universe responded. My soul asked? Margaret shook her head, confused. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to observe the stars in peace. The request doesn't come from the conscious mind, but from the depths of being. Every time you looked at the sky seeking your husband, every time you questioned the meaning of existence, every time you felt that emptiness, even surrounded by people. You were calling, and we heard. Azariel's words resonated somewhere deep inside Margaret. It was true. Even without admitting it to herself, she had been searching for something more for years. Science explained the how, but never the why. Religion offered comfort, but not answers that satisfied her inquisitive mind. Why me? Margaret asked, her voice now firmer. I'm just a retired teacher in a small town. I'm not special. Azariel approached, and Margaret could feel energy emanating from him, warm and comforting like summer sun on skin. Everyone is special, Margaret. Each consciousness is a spark of the divine, a unique note in the cosmic symphony. You were chosen not for being different, but for being ready. Ready for what? Ready to understand. The environment around them began to change. The translucent white gave way to a cosmos in miniature. Stars arose and died in accelerated cycles. Galaxies spiraled in majestic dances. Planets formed and dissolved. It was like watching the history of the universe in fast forward, a vision of beauty so overwhelming that tears began to stream down Margaret's face. What do you want from me? She whispered, amazed. Nothing, Azariel responded. We only want to share. Share the truth that has been veiled from humanity, not out of cruelty, but for protection. You are ready now, or at least some of you are. He extended what could be called a hand, with long and delicate fingers that glowed with that inner light. Are you ready to see beyond the veil, Margaret Holloway? To understand the true nature of God, of Christ, of your own existence. Margaret looked at that extended hand. Part of her, the rational physics teacher, screamed to say no, to wake from that insane dream. But another part, a part she had suppressed for decades, that child who once believed in magic and mystery, that soul that longed for meaning. That part knew she had to accept. She extended her hand and touched Azariel, and the universe exploded in her mind. The moment Margaret's fingers touched Azariel's, she ceased to be just Margaret. Her consciousness expanded like a wave crossing the cosmic ocean, touching billions of points of light simultaneously. She was herself, but she was also more. She was the 73-year-old teacher from Cascade Falls. But she was also the star being born millions of light years away, the child laughing in the park, the atom vibrating at impossible frequencies. Don't fight it. Azariel's voice echoed through the expansion. Let your consciousness flow. What you are experiencing is your true nature. You were never just this body, Margaret. You have always been infinite. Images began to form in Margaret's mind, but they weren't simple visions. They were complete experiences, memories that weren't hers, but somehow belonged to her. She saw an ancient civilization on a turquoise-blue planet, where beings of pure energy taught the first humans about the power of consciousness. They didn't descend from ships, but emerged from the earth itself, called by the collective vibration of primitive humanity that was beginning to question its existence. You call us aliens, Azariel explained as the visions flowed, but that word carries incorrect weight. We precede separation. When the universe breathed its first breath, when the source decided to know itself through experience, we were. And so were you. There is no us and you. There is only consciousness experiencing itself through infinite forms. Margaret watched as the history of humanity unfolded before her, but not the history in the school books she had taught for 40 years. This was the true history, the history of vibrations and frequencies that shaped human evolution. She saw Jesus, not the Jesus of Renaissance paintings or church statues, but a man of flesh and blood, walking through the arid lands of Galilee. But there was something different about him. A light emanated from his center, from his heart, so bright it made the stars seem dim in comparison. What was he? Margaret asked, her voice reverberating through the mental space she shared with Azariel. He was what all of you are destined to become, Azariel responded. A human who remembered? A being who fully accessed the Christ within, the divine spark that resides in every atom of every conscious being. He was not the only Son of God, Margaret. He was the first of many to remember that all are children of God. The visions continued. Margaret saw Jesus not as a distant savior who descended from heaven to die for humanity's sins, but as a teacher, a spiritual scientist who understood the laws that governed consciousness and reality. When he said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he wasn't speaking metaphorically, Azariel continued. He was describing a literal reality. Heaven is not a place in the afterlife. It is a state of consciousness. It is the frequency at which you vibrate when you are aligned with your true divine nature. Margaret saw Jesus healing the sick, and now she understood. It wasn't magic. It was the conscious manipulation of energy and frequency. Each cell of the human body vibrates at a certain frequency. Disease is simply disharmony, a vibration that has fallen out of alignment. Jesus understood this. He could see the frequencies and, through his own elevated consciousness, realign them. And the miracles? Margaret asked, absorbing each revelation like a thirsty sponge. There are no miracles, only laws you don't yet fully understand. When Jesus transformed water into wine, he was manipulating molecular structure through conscious intention. When he walked on water, he was altering his relationship with gravity through the elevation of his vibratory frequency. Everything in the universe is energy. Everything can be transformed through focused consciousness. Margaret's mind was spinning. As a physics teacher, she knew Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. Energy and matter are interchangeable. But she had never considered that consciousness could be the variable that mediated that transformation. You call this the law of attraction in your modern times, Azariel said, and Margaret felt a smile in his telepathic voice. But that name is inadequate and has been distorted. It's not about wishing for cars and houses. It's about understanding that you are a vibrational being in a vibrational universe. When Jesus said, "Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours," he was teaching spiritual quantum physics. Margaret saw more. She saw Buddha under the Bodhi tree reaching the same realization. She saw Sufi mystics spinning in ecstasy, elevating their frequencies through movement and breath. She saw Native American shamans on the plains of what would one day be Oregon, communicating with spirits that were, in reality, aspects of their own expanded consciousness. All spiritual traditions are pointing to the same truth, Azariel explained. Different languages, different metaphors, but the same fundamental reality. You are beings of light having a temporary experience in density. What you call God is not a separate being sitting on a throne in heaven judging your actions. Then what is God? Margaret asked, her voice laden with wonder and a touch of fear. The environment around them exploded in light. Not the light that hurts the eyes, but light that feeds the soul. Margaret found herself at the center of an infinite cosmic web, where each point of light was an individual consciousness, all connected by threads of golden energy that pulsed with life. God is the totality, Azariel responded, and his voice was now multiple, as if 1,000 voices spoke in unison. God is the sum of all consciousnesses, of all experiences, of all love and all pain, all joy and all sorrow. God is the ocean, and you are the waves. A wave can feel separate, can think, I am just this temporary form rising and falling, but it never ceased to be the ocean. Tears flowed freely down Margaret's face now. They weren't tears of sadness, but of recognition. It was as if she had always known this, somewhere deep and forgotten, and now she was remembering. Robert, she whispered, thinking of her deceased husband. Where is he? The cosmic web pulsed, and one of the points of light shone more intensely. He never left, Azariel said gently. Death is an illusion, Margaret. It is only consciousness leaving one vehicle and returning to the source before choosing a new experience. Robert is here now, always has been. You felt his presence when you looked at the stars because your intuition was correct. He is in the stars, just as he is in the wind that touches your face, in the sunlight that warms your skin. He is part of the God that is everything. Can I speak with him? Margaret asked, her voice breaking. You have always been speaking with him. Every time you thought of him with love, every time you felt gratitude for shared memories, you were communicating. Love is the highest frequency, Margaret. It is the glue that holds the universe together. It is literally the force that physicists seek when they search for the theory of everything. Margaret felt a familiar presence. She couldn't see Robert, but she could feel him like a warm embrace around her soul. He was well, more than well. He was home. Why don't we learn this? Margaret asked, now directing her attention back to Azariel. Why don't religions teach this truth? Many tried, Azariel responded, and there was sadness in his voice. But truth is difficult to keep pure when it passes through human hands. Institutions arise. Power corrupts. Leaders who should serve begin to control. The message that you are gods is dangerous for those who wish to keep others in submission. The visions changed again. Margaret saw religious councils throughout history, men in sumptuous robes debating which sacred texts to include and which to burn. She saw knowledge being suppressed, mystics being silenced, wise women being burned as witches because they understood the power of consciousness. The Gnostic Gospels, Azariel continued, were removed from the Bible because they taught too clearly that the divine is within each person. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you, Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas. But that empowers people, and power in the hands of the masses frightens those who govern. Margaret felt anger growing within her. So it was all a lie? My faith, my church. No, Azariel interrupted gently. It wasn't a lie. It was a necessary simplification for consciousnesses that weren't yet ready for the complete truth. Think of how you taught physics to 10-year-old children. You didn't start with quantum mechanics, you started with basic concepts. Traditional religion serves a purpose. It plants seeds. But there comes a time when the seed must become a tree. The anger dissolved, replaced by understanding. Margaret had always known, on some level, that there was more. Now she was seeing the complete picture. And hell? She asked. What is hell? Azariel led her through another vision. She saw people trapped in cycles of anger, fear, hatred. They weren't physical places of fire and brimstone, but mental states. Self-generated prisons where consciousness became trapped in low frequencies, unable to ascend. Hell is separation, Azariel explained. It is the state of consciousness where a being feels completely isolated from the source, from connection, from love. And heaven is union. It is the state where you remember that you were never separated. Both are created by consciousness itself, here and now. You can be in hell in a physical body in Cascade Falls, Oregon, or you can be in heaven. The choice is always yours. How do we choose? Margaret asked, anxious to understand. Through vibration. Through what you focus on, what you feed with your attention and energy. Fear, anger, resentment, envy. These are low frequencies that trap you. Love, gratitude, compassion, joy. These are high frequencies that free you. It's not moral judgment, Margaret. It's spiritual physics. Margaret thought about her life. She thought about the years after Robert's death, when she had sunk into sadness and loneliness. Those were her hell years, she realized now. And the moments of joy when she played with her grandchildren or got lost in the beauty of a sunset. Those were glimpses of heaven. Is it that simple? She asked, almost not believing. Simple, but not easy, Azariel responded. Humanity's greatest challenge is overcoming the programming of fear that has been embedded in your systems for millennia. Fear of scarcity, fear of death, fear of divine punishment. But as more and more of you awaken, as more people remember their true nature, the collective consciousness rises. Is that why you're here? Margaret asked. To help us awaken? We have always been here, Azariel said. In different forms, in different eras. Sometimes as teachers in physical form, like Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, other times as visitors from other realms, like me, but always with the same purpose, to remind you of who you really are. The visions began to slow down. Margaret felt her consciousness being gently pulled back, like a tide returning to shore. There was so much more she wanted to know, so much more she wanted to understand. Not yet, Azariel said, responding to the unverbalized thought. You need to process what you've already received. Your human mind is incredible, but it has limits. Too much knowledge too quickly can overload the system. Will I see you again? Margaret asked, feeling unexpected sadness at the idea of separation. Whenever you need, Azariel responded, and Margaret felt what could be described as a telepathic embrace. Now you know you're not alone. You never were. And when you look at the stars, remember you're not looking outward. You're looking inward. The stars are in you, just as you are in the stars. The white environment began to return. The cosmic web disappeared, replaced by the soft luminosity. Margaret felt her body again, the sensation of weight gradually returning. One last thing, Azariel said, his form beginning to fade. You wondered why The truth is that many are called, but not all are ready to hear. You were chosen not only to receive this information, but to share it. When you return, some people will believe you. Many will not. That doesn't matter. Plant the seeds, Margaret Holloway. Those who are ready will recognize the truth when they hear it. How will I know what to say? Margaret asked, feeling the weight of responsibility. You will know, Azariel assured. The words will come. Wisdom will flow through you when needed. You are now a bridge between worlds, a translator of the divine to the human. Trust that. And then, with a flash of golden light, Margaret opened her eyes and was back on her porch. The teacup was still shattered on the floor. The porcelain shards scattered like fragments of a previous life. But something was different. The sky was beginning to lighten on the eastern horizon. Margaret looked at the wristwatch she had worn for 20 years, a gift from Robert. It was 5:43 in the morning. She had left at 9 o'clock the previous night. 8 hours. 8 hours had passed in what seemed like only minutes. Margaret stood up from the rocking chair, expecting to feel the usual pains in her back and knees. But there was no pain. In fact, she felt better than she had felt in decades. Her muscles were relaxed, her mind was clear, and there was energy vibrating through every cell of her body. She looked at her hands. They were the same age-spotted hands, with prominent veins and thin skin. But now she could see beyond the physical form. She could perceive the energy flowing through them, small currents of golden light that pulsed in sync with her heart. My God, she whispered, and then laughed at the absurdity of the expression. Now she understood. She was God, not in the arrogant sense, but in the sense that she was a unique and precious expression of the divine. Just like every leaf in the forest around her house, every bird beginning to sing the dawn, every atom in the universe. Margaret went inside. Passing through the hallway decorated with family photographs, she stopped in front of a wedding photo, she and Robert young and radiant in 1973. She placed her hand over the glass and closed her eyes, and she felt him. It wasn't imagination. It was a real presence, a consciousness touching hers through the veil that was no veil at all, just an illusion of separation. Love flooded her heart, so intense that she had to lean against the wall. "You knew this all along, didn't you?" she whispered to the photograph. "That's why you were always so calm in the face of death." You had already remembered. Memories returned, but now she saw them with new eyes. Robert on his deathbed at Portland's Mercy Hospital, smiling despite the pain, saying, "Don't cry, Maggie. It's just a door. I'll be waiting on the other side." At the time, she had thought they were words of comfort, perhaps influenced by morphine. Now she knew. He had been certain. Margaret spent the rest of that Saturday morning in a state of silent wonder. Each mundane action, washing the porcelain shards, preparing coffee, watering the plants, became a sacred act. She could feel the consciousness in everything. The lily plant in the window wasn't just a thing. It was a being vibrating at its own frequency, responding to the love in her words when she said, "Good morning, dear." She tried to sleep around 7 in the morning, but her body didn't feel tired. Instead, she sat in her favorite armchair in the living room, the worn green velvet one where she had read thousands of books over the years, and began to meditate. It wasn't something she had practiced before, but now it seemed natural. She closed her eyes, focused on her breathing, and instantly felt her consciousness expand. She could feel her neighbors, Jonathan Fisher, 3 houses down, waking with anxiety about bills due on Monday. She sent a thought of peace in his direction, and curiously, felt his anxiety diminish slightly. Amelia Rosewood across the street, feeding her cats and feeling lonely since her sister had moved to Seattle. Margaret sent love and felt Amelia smile without knowing why. It was real. Everything Azariel had shown was absolutely real. The phone rang at 10:15, pulling Margaret from her meditation. It was Evangeline, her daughter. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different," Evangeline said as soon as Margaret answered, before even a greeting. "Different how?" Margaret asked, surprised. "I don't know. Your voice. It sounds more light, younger. Did something good happen?" Margaret hesitated. How could she explain? How could she tell her daughter, a pragmatic lawyer who believed only in what could be proven in court, that she had been abducted by an alien being of light who taught her the true nature of God and reality? "I had an interesting experience last night," Margaret said carefully. "Something that changed my perspective on many things." "Oh no," Evangeline sighed. "Mom, you didn't join one of those weird cults, did you? Because if someone is asking you for money—" "It's nothing like that, dear," Margaret laughed. "It's hard to explain over the phone. But I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I'm awakened." There was a pause. "Awakened. Okay, Mom, you're 73 years old. Maybe you should see Dr. Pemberton, just to make sure everything is okay with, your head." Margaret smiled. She wasn't offended. She would have thought the same thing a week ago. "My head is perfect, Evangeline. But I understand your concern. How about you and Thomas come visit me next weekend? I'd like to talk to you both about some things." "Sure, Mom. We can go on Saturday. I'll let Thomas know." After they hung up, Margaret sat in silence, contemplating how she would share her experience. Azariel had said she would know when the moment arrived. She had to trust that. The following days were of continuous discovery. Margaret began to experiment with what she had learned. She discovered that when she focused intensely on something with love and gratitude, things began to manifest in strange ways. On Monday, while paying for her groceries at the Evergreen Market, she thought about how nice it would be to have more money to help the local animal shelter that was struggling. On Wednesday, she received a letter informing her that she had inherited $15,000 from a distant aunt in Vermont who had passed away. Margaret didn't even remember having an aunt in Vermont. On Tuesday, while walking in the municipal park, she saw a young woman crying on a bench. Instinctively, Margaret approached and placed her hand on the woman's shoulder. "Everything will be okay," she said gently. The woman looked up, surprised, and Margaret saw golden light flowing from her own hands to the young woman. The woman stopped crying instantly, her eyes widening. I feel better. I don't know how, but I feel better." "Who are you?" "Just someone who understands," Margaret responded with a smile and continued her walk, leaving the young woman confused but inexplicably healed. It was the law of attraction, but not as self-help books described. It wasn't about visualizing luxury cars or mansions. It was about aligning your vibrational frequency with what you wish to attract. It was about becoming the change you wanted to see. It was about recognizing that you were the creator of your reality, not through superficial positive thinking, but through deep understanding that consciousness shaped matter. Margaret also noticed physical changes. The arthritic pains in her fingers disappeared. Her vision improved to the point where she no longer needed her reading glasses. When she went to Dr. Pemberton for her annual checkup on Thursday, he was perplexed. "Margaret, I don't know how to explain this," he said, looking at the test results. "But your blood pressure is perfect. Your cholesterol dropped 30 points. Your joints show no signs of inflammation. You are biologically a decade younger than you were last year. What have you been doing differently?" "I awakened," Margaret said simply, and the doctor laughed, thinking it was a joke about sleeping better. On Friday night, alone at home, Margaret decided to try something Azariel had shown. She sat in lotus position on the living room floor, something her body shouldn't be able to do, but now was easy. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, letting her consciousness expand. And then, with clear intention, she asked to see beyond the veil. The physical world around her began to dissolve. The walls of her house became translucent, then transparent, then disappeared completely. She could see the energy flowing through everything. The electrical wiring in the walls glowed with blue light. The trees outside pulsed with green light. The earth beneath her feet was a network of golden light, lines of energy that the ancients called ley lines. And above, in the night sky that was now visible through the non-existent ceiling, she saw the ships, hundreds of them, thousands, some large as cities, others small as cars. They had always been there, Margaret realized, simply operating at frequencies that normal human eyes couldn't detect. Watching, guiding, occasionally intervening in subtle ways, she felt no fear. She felt gratitude. Humanity had never been alone, could never be alone because everything was connected in the great web of consciousness. "Thank you," she whispered to the cosmos. "Thank you for showing me. Thank you for reminding me." And from the cosmos, she felt a response. Not in words, but in pure feeling. It was as if the universe itself was smiling at her. Saturday dawned with clear skies and pleasant temperature. Margaret woke, although she hadn't really slept. She no longer needed sleep in the same way. A few hours of deep meditation restored her body and mind better than 8 hours of sleep ever had. She prepared an elaborate lunch for her children's visit. Vegetarian lasagna with eggplant from her own garden, Caesar salad and apple pie with vanilla ice cream. Evangeline and Thomas would arrive at noon with their families. While cooking, Margaret practiced what she would say. How to translate the ineffable into words that would make sense to minds still operating in limited three-dimensional consciousness. Azariel had said the words would come. She would have to trust that. At 12:15, 2 cars parked in front of the house. Evangeline got out first from her black SUV, followed by her husband David and their 2 children, Sophie aged 9 and Marcus aged 6. Thomas arrived right after in his pickup truck with his wife Jennifer and baby Noah, 18 months old. "Grandma!" Sophie shouted, running toward Margaret with open arms. Margaret hugged her granddaughter, and the moment their bodies touched, she felt the purity of the child's soul. Sophie was still close to the source, her consciousness not fully obscured by the world's conditioning. Margaret could see what Azariel had described, the Christ within, the divine spark shining brightly inside the girl. "You look different, Grandma," Sophie said, looking at Margaret with curious eyes. "You're glowing." "Sophie, don't be silly," Evangeline said quickly, but Margaret saw the concern in her daughter's eyes. "She's right," Margaret said calmly. "I am glowing. It's good that you can see that, dear. It means you still have your true eyes." During lunch, the conversation was light. Thomas talked about his work as a software engineer at a Portland startup. Evangeline discussed a complicated case she was handling involving property rights. David complained about Portland traffic. Jennifer shared funny stories about Noah beginning to talk. Margaret listened to everything with deep attention, not just with her ears, but with her heart. She could feel the unspoken emotions behind the words. Thomas's stress with impossible deadlines, Evangeline's loneliness despite being surrounded by people, David's fear about the economy, Jennifer's exhaustion with motherhood. After lunch, while the children played in the yard and the sons-in-law washed dishes, Margaret asked Evangeline and Thomas to sit with her in the living room. "I need to tell you both something," she began, her hands folded in her lap. Something that happened last week that changed everything for me. Evangeline and Thomas exchanged worried looks. Mom, if you're sick, Thomas began. I'm not sick. In fact, I've never felt so healthy, Margaret interrupted. But I had an experience that most people would call impossible. And then, she told, she began with the light in the sky, the paralysis on the porch, awakening in the white space. She spoke about Azariel and the revelations about the nature of God, about Jesus and the Christ within, about heaven and hell as states of consciousness, about the law of attraction as spiritual physics. Evangeline became increasingly pale as the story progressed. Thomas frowned, his face showing growing skepticism. Mom, Evangeline finally interrupted when Margaret paused. You're telling me you believe you were abducted by aliens? I don't just believe. I know. It happened. As real as you're sitting in this chair right now, Margaret responded calmly. Okay, let's think about this logically, Thomas said, his voice careful, the kind used with children or confused elderly. You were alone on the porch. It was dark. You're 73 years old. Is it possible that you fell asleep, maybe dreamed? It wasn't a dream, Thomas. And I know what you're thinking. I would think the same if someone told me this story 2 weeks ago. But look at me. Really look. Margaret stood up and extended her hands. My arthritis pains disappeared. My vision is perfect. Dr. Pemberton was shocked by my test results. I am healthier now than I was at 50 years old. Is that explainable by a dream? Placebo effect, Evangeline said quickly. Or maybe you're taking some new supplements that are helping. Mom, I understand that you want to believe in something greater, especially since Dad has been gone. But aliens? Teaching about Jesus? Do you realize how that sounds? Margaret sighed. She expected resistance, but it still hurt coming from her own children. Evangeline, Thomas, I'm not asking you to believe blindly. I just ask that you keep your minds open. What I learned doesn't contradict science. It expands science. It doesn't contradict faith. It deepens faith. So what do you want us to do? Thomas asked, clearly uncomfortable. Just listen. Allow yourselves to consider that maybe, just maybe, there's more to reality than you were taught. Do you remember when you were children and would lie on the grass looking at the clouds, wondering about the universe? Where did that sense of wonder go? Thomas looked down. Evangeline crossed her arms defensively. Margaret continued, her voice gentle but firm. You're so caught up in survival, in routine, in what is real and practical, that you've forgotten to live. You've forgotten that you're infinite beings having a temporary human experience. And in that amnesia, you suffer unnecessarily. Suffering is part of life, Mom, Evangeline said. Not all of us can float on clouds of spiritual bliss. Some of us have real responsibilities. The phrase was said with more bitterness than Evangeline probably intended. Margaret saw the truth behind it. Her daughter was exhausted, burned out, feeling trapped in a life that seemed more like a prison than a blessing. Margaret stood and went to Evangeline, kneeling before her and taking her hands. Dear, I know you're suffering. I can feel it. The weight you carry, trying to be the perfect lawyer, the perfect wife, the perfect mother. But you're slowly killing yourself, and all because you've forgotten who you really are. Tears began to form in Evangeline's eyes. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. You are love, Margaret said simply. You are a unique and precious expression of the divine. You are infinitely powerful and infinitely loved. And when you remember that, when you align your life with that truth, everything will change. Thomas cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotion. Mom, even if all this is true, even if you had some kind of legitimate spiritual encounter, what do you expect us to do with this information? Margaret turned to him. Just consider. Experiment. Try meditating for 10 minutes a day. Practice gratitude. Pay attention to your thoughts and how they create your reality. See what happens. And if nothing happens, Thomas asked. Then you'll have lost 10 minutes a day and gained a bit of peace of mind, Margaret responded with a smile. But something will happen, Thomas, because truth is truth, regardless of whether you believe in it or not. Gravity works even if you don't believe in it. The same applies to spiritual laws. There was a long silence. Finally, Evangeline spoke. Okay, I'll try. I don't promise to believe in alien abduction, but I'll try meditation and gratitude. If it makes you happy, Mom? Don't do it for me, Margaret said. Do it for yourself. Thomas nodded reluctantly. I'll try too, but if I start seeing spaceships, I'm stopping immediately, he tried to joke, and everyone laughed, breaking some of the tension. When their families left that afternoon, Margaret felt simultaneously energized and drained. Planting seeds was difficult, especially in skeptical soil. But she had done her part. The rest was beyond her control. In the following weeks, Margaret felt a growing compulsion to share her experience with more people. It wasn't ego or desire for attention. It was more like a mission that pulsed in her heart, a sacred responsibility she couldn't ignore. She started small. At the Methodist Church the following Sunday, during the testimony moment, Margaret stood up. Reverend Blackwood, a man of 60 years with graying hair and gentle eyes, nodded encouragingly to her. "Brothers and sisters," Margaret began, her voice clear, echoing through the sanctuary she had attended for 40 years. "I would like to share something that happened to me recently, something that profoundly changed my understanding of God and our relationship with the divine." The congregation of approximately 80 people leaned forward, curious. Margaret Holloway was known for being sensible and scientific. If she had something to say, it was worth listening. Margaret told an edited version of her story. She didn't mention Azariel or the spaceship directly, but spoke about a profound spiritual experience where truths were revealed to her. She spoke about the Christ within, about how Jesus came not to save us from God, but to show us that we are one with God. She spoke about heaven and hell as states of consciousness we create here and now through our vibrations. As she spoke, she observed the reactions. Some faces showed genuine interest, others confusion, and some clear disapproval. When she finished and sat down, Reverend Blackwood was silent for a moment before standing up. "Thank you for sharing, Margaret. Certainly, an interesting perspective. Perhaps we can discuss this more deeply after the service." But after the service, it was different. 3 elderly women, part of the church's conservative core, surrounded Margaret in the parking lot. Margaret Holloway. "You should be ashamed," said Mildred Patterson, an 82-year-old woman who had attended that church since 1959. "Speaking heresies like that. Christ within. We are not God. That's blasphemy." "With all respect, Mildred," Margaret responded calmly, "Jesus said, 'You are gods' in John 10:34. And in Luke 17:21, he said, 'The kingdom of God is within you.' I'm not making up these ideas. I'm simply paying attention to what has always been in the scriptures. You're taking the words out of context," Mildred insisted, her face turning red. "And this talk about vibration and energy? That's New Age, not Christianity." "Perhaps Christianity and the New Age aren't as different as we think," Margaret suggested. "Perhaps all spiritual truths point to the same fundamental reality." The 3 women walked away, scandalized. But Margaret also noticed other people waiting to speak with her. Janet Reeves, a young mother of 32 years, approached with shining eyes. "Thank you," Janet said in a low voice. "Thank you for saying that. I always felt there was something more, something beyond the sermons about sin and punishment. What you said resonated deeply with me. You're ready to awaken," Margaret said gently, placing her hand on Janet's arm. She felt the energy flow, that golden light she now recognized as pure divine love. Trust what you feel, not just what you've been told to believe. 2 more people approached with sincere questions. A man named Derek Chen, an engineer who had struggled for years to reconcile his religious faith with his scientific mind, and a teenager named Riley Morrison, 16 years old, who had always felt out of place in church because her questions were considered impertinent. Margaret spent an hour in the parking lot talking with these hungry souls. She gave them her phone number and invited them to come to her house if they wanted to discuss more. "I don't know all the answers," she said honestly, "but I can share what I've learned and we can explore together." Reverend Blackwood also sought her out, but his expression was worried. "Margaret, I understand that you had a significant experience, but I need to ask that you be careful. Some of the things you said today could confuse people who have simpler faith. Not everyone is ready for such advanced concepts." "Reverend," Margaret responded respectfully, "with all due respect, perhaps we're underestimating our congregation. Perhaps people are more ready than we think, and if they're not ready, they simply won't resonate with the message. But those who are ready deserve to hear. The Reverend sighed. Maybe you could consider sharing these ideas in a more private context. Perhaps a Bible study group instead of public testimony? Margaret understood what he was really saying. Stop disrupting my church. She nodded politely, but knew she couldn't completely silence herself. The following week, 5 people appeared at Margaret's house for what she called open spiritual discussion. Janet Reeves brought her husband, Kevin. Derek Chen came alone. Riley Morrison brought her best friend, Zara Okonkwo. And surprisingly, a stranger appeared, a man in his 40s named Marcus Finnegan, who had heard about Margaret through a friend of a friend. They sat in a circle in Margaret's living room, with tea and homemade cookies. The atmosphere was one of nervous expectation. "Before we begin," Margaret said, "I want to make it clear that I'm not a guru. I'm not here to convert anyone or create followers. I'm simply sharing what I've learned and creating a space where we can explore these ideas together." "Okay," everyone agreed. "Now," Margaret continued, "I want to tell you the complete story. Not the edited version I shared at church, but everything. And I understand if some of you decide I'm crazy and leave. I won't hold a grudge." And then she told about the light in the sky, about Azariel, about the cosmic revelations. She spoke in detail about what she had learned about the nature of God, about Jesus as an awakened human, about the law of attraction as spiritual physics, about heaven and hell as vibrational states. When she finished, there was silence. Then Marcus Finnegan began to laugh, not a laugh of mockery, but of joyful recognition. "I knew it," he exclaimed. "I always knew there was something like this. I had an experience when I was 23 years old, after a near-fatal car accident. I saw the same web of light you described, the connection of everything. But when I tried to talk about it, people told me it was just brain trauma. I started to doubt my own sanity." "You're not crazy," Margaret assured him. "You had a glimpse of truth. Many people have through near-death experiences. It's one of the ways the universe reminds us of who we really are." Derek Chen was leaning forward, his analytical eyes processing everything. "This makes sense," he said slowly. "As a scientist, I've always known that everything is energy. E=mc². But I never considered that consciousness could be the variable that mediates the transformation of energy into matter. If this is true, then prayer, meditation, focused intention, all these spiritual practices have a real scientific basis." "Exactly," Margaret said animatedly. "Science and spirituality aren't opposites. They are 2 languages describing the same reality. Scientists talk about quantum fields and probabilities collapsing into reality through observation. Mystics talk about consciousness creating reality through intention. It's the same thing." Riley, the teenager, raised her hand timidly. "So, when Jesus performed miracles, he was basically using quantum physics?" Margaret smiled. "Essentially, yes. He understood the laws that govern reality at a much deeper level than most people. He knew that matter is just condensed energy and that consciousness can influence the state of energy. That's why he could heal, could transform substances, could even resurrect the dead. And he said we could do the same things he did," Janet added, remembering the scriptures. John 14:12, "Whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these." "Exactly," Margaret confirmed. He wasn't boasting about his unique powers. He was teaching about our shared potential. He was a teacher, a spiritual older brother, not a distant god to be worshipped, but never emulated. Zara, who had been quiet until now, spoke. "In my Nigerian tradition, my grandmother always talked about ancestors who could do amazing things. She said they had the knowledge. Is this the same thing?" "Every culture has its traditions of awakened people," Margaret explained. "Shamans, saints, sages, healers, they access the same fundamental knowledge about the nature of reality. The names and methods vary, but the underlying truth is universal." The group talked for 3 hours. They discussed personal experiences, asked questions, shared doubts. Margaret taught them simple meditation techniques, showed them how to feel energy in their own hands, guided them through visualizations where they could begin to perceive beyond the 5 physical senses. When the meeting ended, everyone agreed to meet again the following week, and they asked to bring friends. Margaret's group grew. In the second week, there were 12 people. In the third, 23. In the fourth week, her living room was filled with 37 people, and she had to move the meetings to the garage. But with growth came unwanted attention, rumors. began to circulate in Cascade Falls. Margaret Holloway is running a cult. She says she was abducted by aliens. She's teaching witchcraft disguised as Christianity. In the third week of October, 2 missionaries from the local Baptist church appeared at her door. They were young, no more than 25 years old, with practiced smiles and Bibles in their hands. Mrs. Holloway, the taller one, who introduced himself as Elder Jackson, began, "We heard that you've been confused about some matters of faith. We'd like to help you get back on the right path." Margaret invited them in politely. She served lemonade and listened patiently while they quoted scriptures about false prophets and the importance of salvation only through Jesus Christ. "I agree that Jesus is the way," Margaret said when they finished, "but not because he is the only bridge to a distant God. Jesus is the way because he showed the way to access the divine within ourselves. He modeled the Christ consciousness that we can all achieve." "That's heresy," Elder Jackson said. No more smiles now. "Mrs. Holloway, the Bible is clear. John 14:6. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is the only way." "And I'm not denying that," Margaret responded calmly. But when Jesus said "I," he wasn't speaking of his human personality. He was speaking of the Christ consciousness, the awakened aspect of the divine that he embodied. That same consciousness is in all of us, waiting to be activated. The 2 missionaries exchanged frustrated looks. They had come prepared to convert a confused elderly woman, not to debate theology with someone who knew the scriptures as well as they did. "You're going to hell with these beliefs," the other missionary, Elder Morrison, said directly. Margaret smiled gently. "I've already been in hell, dears. I lived there for years after my husband's death, trapped in sadness and separation. And now I'm in heaven, experiencing union and joy. Both were created by my own consciousness, here on earth. And the same is true for you." They left frustrated, but Margaret prayed that seeds had been planted in their hearts. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but one day, when they were ready, the words might resonate. The resistance also came from unexpected places. Evangeline called one night, her voice tense. "Mom, people are talking. My colleagues at the law firm asked if my mother is that crazy UFO woman in Cascade Falls. This is starting to affect my professional reputation." Margaret felt her heart tighten. "I'm sorry, dear. I never wanted to embarrass you." "Then stop," Evangeline pleaded. "Stop with these meetings. Stop talking about aliens and energy and all this craziness. Please, Mom, for me." Margaret was silent for a long moment. "Evangeline, I love you more than words can express. But I can't stop. This isn't about ego or attention. It's a mission that my heart won't allow me to ignore. People are awakening through these meetings. Lives are changing. Your life will change too if they keep calling you crazy," Evangeline shouted. "They'll lock you up somewhere." "If that's my destiny, then so be it," Margaret said calmly. "But I can't live in fear of what others think." "Not anymore." "I'm sorry, dear." Evangeline hung up without saying goodbye. Margaret cried that night, but didn't change course. But not everything was opposition. The lives being touched were real and profound. Janet Reeves, who had suffered from depression for years, stopped taking medication after 3 weeks practicing meditation techniques and vibration shifting. Her therapist was astonished by her transformation. Derek Chen reconciled with his brother after 15 years of separation. He described how, during meditation, he felt an overwhelming compulsion to forgive and ask for forgiveness. When he called his brother, he discovered he had been thinking of him at the exact same moment. Marcus Finnegan, who had been addicted to alcohol, became sober. He said he no longer needed to numb himself because now he understood the emptiness he was trying to fill. And that emptiness was being filled by connection with his own inner divinity. Riley, the teenager, brought a letter one night. With tears streaming down her face, she read aloud to the group. "I was planning to take my life. I had set the date, November 10th. But then I came to this meeting, and for the first time in my life, I understood that I'm not alone, that I'm loved by the universe itself, that I have a purpose. You saved me." There were no dry eyes in the garage that night. These were the reasons why Margaret couldn't stop, even in the face of opposition. Real lives were being saved, not in the abstract sense of religious salvation, but in the tangible sense of people being freed from mental and emotional prisons. One night, after a particularly powerful meeting, Margaret went out to her porch. She looked at the stars, her telescope forgotten because now she could see beyond physical light. "Azariel," she called mentally. "Are you there?" The response came immediately, that familiar presence expanding in her consciousness. "I have always been, Margaret. I always will be. It's hard," she admitted. "Harder than I thought it would be. People are calling me crazy. My own daughter is ashamed of me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing." "You're planting seeds in rocky soil," Azariel responded. "Not all seeds will germinate, but those that do will grow into powerful trees that will produce their own seeds. You're initiating a chain reaction that will extend far beyond your lifetime. What if I'm not strong enough? You are stronger than you know, and you're not alone. Look around you, Margaret. See those who are awakening beside you. See the growing light." Margaret closed her eyes and expanded her consciousness as Azariel had taught, and she saw. She saw not just the 37 people who attended her meetings, but the circles expanding from them. Janet teaching meditation practices to her friends. Derek sharing insights with his colleagues. Riley writing on her blog about spiritual awakening, reaching hundreds of teenagers around the country, and it wasn't just in Cascade Falls. Around the world, millions of people were awakening simultaneously. Some through experiences like hers, others through reading, through teachers, through their own inner journeys. A massive shift in consciousness was occurring, exactly as Azariel had said. "Humanity is on the threshold," Azariel continued. "In the coming years and decades, more and more people will remember their true nature. There will be resistance, yes. The old paradigm won't give up easily, but the tide has already turned. Awakening is inevitable. What should I do now?" Margaret asked. "Continue. Continue planting. Continue loving. Continue being the light. And when it's time, when you complete your work in this form, you'll return home. But your legacy will live through all those you've touched." Margaret opened her eyes, feeling profound peace. She knew what she had to do, not just continue the meetings, but expand. She would begin writing, documenting everything she had learned. She would create resources that could survive her, words that could touch people she would never personally meet. The following months were of explosive growth and intense challenges. Margaret's group now had over 100 people who met weekly. She had rented the town's community hall to accommodate everyone. People came not just from Cascade Falls, but from Portland, Salem, and even Seattle. Margaret began recording her talks on video, and Derek Chen, with his technical skills, created a YouTube channel called Awakening with Margaret. The videos began to spread. First dozens of views, then hundreds, then thousands. But with growing visibility came growing scrutiny. In mid-January of 2024, a reporter from the newspaper The Cascade Chronicle, named Preston Whitmore, appeared at one of the meetings. He was a thin man of 38 years with skeptical eyes and a worn notepad. Margaret welcomed him warmly, as she did with all visitors. "Welcome, Preston. Feel free to observe and ask questions." During that night's meeting, Margaret guided the group through a powerful meditation where many reported visions and profound experiences. She spoke about the quantum physics of prayer, about how collective consciousness can influence events in the physical world, about the importance of raising one's vibration through love and gratitude. After the meeting, Preston asked for a private interview. Sitting in Margaret's kitchen with hot coffee, he began his questions. "Mrs. Holloway, do you really believe you were abducted by aliens?" "I don't use the word believe," Margaret responded calmly. "Believing implies uncertainty. I know I had an encounter with a non-human consciousness that identified itself as Azariel. Call it alien, angel, interdimensional being. The labels are less important than the experience and the teachings. But you must understand how this sounds to rational people," Preston pressed. "There's no physical evidence, no photos, no artifacts. Just your word," Margaret smiled. "The evidence is in the transformation. People who were depressed are now joyful. Addicts who became sober. Relationships that were healed. Lives that were saved. These are real and measurable evidence, even if they're not the kind you can hold in your hands." "Or," Preston suggested, "you could be running a successful support group disguised as a spiritual meeting. People feel better because of the community and support, not because of some cosmic truth about aliens and energy." That's a perfectly reasonable explanation, Margaret agreed. And if that explanation works for you, that's fine. But for those who have experienced the truth directly, who have felt the energy, who have had their own awakening experiences, for them it's not theory. It's lived reality, Preston wrote furiously. Aren't you worried about misleading vulnerable people? Especially by charging an entrance fee for your meetings? I don't charge an entrance fee, Margaret corrected firmly. There's a voluntary donation basket to cover hall rental and materials, but no one is turned away for lack of money. In fact, many people come for free, and that's perfectly fine. But you accept donations. And some could argue you're profiting from people's vulnerabilities. Margaret took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Preston, I understand your skepticism. It's your job to ask difficult questions. But here's the truth. I don't need money. I have my retirement, Robert's inheritance, and now my aunt's inheritance. I could do these meetings for free if I wanted. The donations simply cover practical costs and occasionally help someone in the group who's going through financial difficulties. So why do it? Preston asked, and for the first time, she heard genuine curiosity in his voice instead of just skepticism. Why subject yourself to ridicule, criticism, stress? What do you gain from this? Margaret looked through the kitchen window at the garden where the first spring shoots were beginning to appear despite the January cold. Purpose, she said simply. For the first time in my life since Robert's death, I feel I have a real purpose. I'm not just existing, I'm living, and I'm helping others discover the same. Preston closed his notepad. Off the record, Mrs. Holloway, have you considered that you might be experiencing some kind of age-related cognitive decline? That these experiences might be hallucinations or confabulations? Margaret laughed, a genuine and joyful sound. Off the record, Preston. I underwent complete neurological exams in November. Scans, cognitive tests, everything. My brain is perfectly healthy. In fact, the doctors said I have the cognitive function of someone 30 years younger. So no, it's not dementia. Preston's article was published a week later. The title was, Local Teacher Claims Alien Contact. Attracts Followers. The article was balanced, presenting both facts and skepticism, but inevitably painted Margaret as an eccentric figure at best. Dangerous at worst. The reaction was immediate. Half the town defended her, citing the positive transformations they had witnessed. The other half intensified calls for her to be silenced or even investigated. That's when Evangeline appeared unannounced on a Tuesday night. Her eyes red from crying. Mom, she said as she entered, we need to talk. They sat in the living room, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Evangeline broke the silence. I tried what you suggested. The meditation, the gratitude. And at first I thought it was nonsense. But I kept trying because I was desperate. My marriage was falling apart, my work was killing me. I barely recognized the person in the mirror. Margaret waited, letting her daughter process. And then, 3 nights ago, something happened, Evangeline continued, her voice breaking. I was meditating and suddenly, I wasn't in my room anymore. I was somewhere different, and there was this light and this presence, and it was like every question I ever had was answered without words. It was like I remembered something I always knew, but had forgotten. Tears flowed freely now down Evangeline's face. You were right, Mom, about everything. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for doubting you, for being ashamed of you, for asking you to stop. You were trying to give me the greatest gift possible, and I spat it back. Margaret moved to the couch and embraced her daughter, both crying now. You have nothing to apologize for, dear. You had to get there in your own time. No one can be forced to awaken. The seed only germinates when conditions are right. What do I do now? Evangeline asked. How do I live in this world knowing what I know? How do I go back to work and pretend that processing corporate contracts matters when I've seen the infinity of the universe? Margaret smiled through the tears. You don't pretend. You transform. You bring this consciousness to every area of your life. You can be a lawyer and be awakened. In fact, awakened lawyers can change the justice system from within, bringing compassion and wisdom where before there was only cold logic. Can I start coming to your meetings? Evangeline asked. Officially this time, not hidden in the back like I did last week. Margaret laughed. You were there last week? I didn't see you. I hid in the corner wearing a hat, but I heard every word, and it touched deeply. Mother and daughter spent hours talking that night, sharing experiences, asking questions, laughing and crying. When Evangeline finally left near midnight, Margaret felt a joy so deep she thought her heart might explode. Azariel was right. The seeds were germinating. In March of 2024, something extraordinary happened. Margaret was alone at home on a Thursday afternoon, writing another chapter of the book she was compiling, when she felt a change in the energy around her. The air became denser, charged with that familiar electricity. She looked up and saw Azariel standing in her living room, but this time it was different. He wasn't just in translucent form. He appeared almost solid, almost human, although he still emanated that unmistakable inner light. "Margaret," he said aloud for the first time, not telepathically. The voice was melodic, full of impossible harmonics. "The time has come for a final revelation." Margaret stood, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "You have done well," Azariel said, approaching. "You have planted more seeds than you imagined. But there is a final truth that must be shared, the piece that completes the puzzle." The environment around them began to change. The living room walls became transparent, and Margaret saw the cosmos around them once more. But this time there was something different. She could see threads. Billions of golden threads connecting each point of light, each consciousness in the universe. "What you're seeing," Azariel explained, "is the true structure of reality. What physicists call the quantum field, what mystics call Akasha, what Christians call the Holy Spirit. It's all the same thing, the web of consciousness that connects and sustains all existence." Margaret watched in wonder as the threads pulsed with light. And then she noticed something amazing. The threads weren't passive. They were alive, conscious. They were the very medium through which consciousness communicated with itself. "When Jesus said, 'I and the Father are one,'" Azariel continued, "he was describing this literally, not metaphorically. He had become conscious that his individual consciousness was just a point of expression of universal consciousness. He could feel through these threads, could influence through them, because he remembered he was never separate." "And everyone can do this?" Margaret asked. "Everyone," Azariel confirmed. "This is the great lie that humanity has believed for so long, that you are separate. Separate from God, separate from each other, separate from nature. But separation is impossible. You can feel separate in the same way a wave can feel separate from the ocean. But it's a perceptual illusion, not a reality." The threads began to glow more intensely, and Margaret felt something opening in her heart. It was as if a seal she didn't even know existed was breaking. "The Christ within is not just a beautiful idea," Azariel said. "It's a literal reality. It's the point where individual consciousness touches universal consciousness. It's the portal through which the infinite experiences the finite. And when you fully activate that portal, when you completely remember who you are, you transcend the limitations of human existence." "Jesus did this," Margaret said, understanding. That's why he could perform miracles. He had fully activated his Christ within, yes, and he tried to teach humanity to do the same. "Whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing." He wasn't asking for blind worship. He was offering a path, a method, a spiritual technology. Margaret thought about all the people she had touched in recent months. Janet, Derek, Marcus, Riley, Evangeline, and so many others. "So what I'm doing? I'm helping people activate their portals? Their Christ within?" "Exactly. And as more people awaken, as more portals open, humanity's collective consciousness rises. You are in the middle of a massive evolution, Margaret. Not just physical or technological, but conscious. Humanity is preparing to take the next great leap. Where are we leaping to?" Margaret asked. Azariel smiled, and it was like seeing the sun itself smile. "To remembrance, to unity, to the understanding that you were never just human. You are cosmic beings having a temporary human experience. And when humanity as a whole remembers that, everything will change. How long will it take? In human time measure, generations. But in cosmic measure, a blink of an eye. And each soul that awakens accelerates the process. You have been a catalyst, Margaret, and your work is far from finished." The threads of light began to retract, and the room returned to normal. But Margaret was no longer the same. Something fundamental had changed in her. She could feel the threads now, even when she didn't see them. She could feel her connection with everything. "Will I see you again?" she asked as Azariel began to fade. "Whenever you need," he responded. "But you won't need as much anymore. You have remembered. The teacher is now master, and a master doesn't need an external teacher, for the greatest teacher is within." And then he was gone, but Margaret knew he never really left. He was in the threads, in the web, in the very structure of reality. She returned to her manuscript, but not to continue where she had stopped. Instead, she began a new final chapter titled, "The Final Truth, You Were Never Alone." She wrote frantically for hours, the words flowing through her more than from her. She wrote about the threads of consciousness, about the Christ within as a portal to infinity, about humanity's imminent evolution, about the true meaning of heaven and hell, of life and death, of love and fear. When she finally stopped, the sun was rising. She had written 50 pages in a single session. 6 months later, in September of 2024, Margaret's book, Awakened, A Teacher, An Encounter, A Truth, was independently published. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few hundred copies sold to people in her group and their friends. But the universe had other plans. The book began to spread organically. People who read it recommended it to others. Spiritual bloggers reviewed it. Podcasters interviewed her. In 6 months, it had sold over 50,000 copies. But more important than the numbers were the stories. Margaret received emails daily from people around the world sharing their own awakening experiences after reading her book. A man in Australia wrote that he had planned suicide, but after reading the chapter about heaven and hell as states of consciousness, realized he could change his internal hell without ending his life. A woman in Brazil described how, after practicing the meditation techniques in the book, she had her own encounter with a being of light who confirmed everything Margaret had written. A doctor in India shared that he had integrated the principles of vibrational healing into his practice and was seeing remarkable results with patients that conventional medicine had given up on. Margaret's meetings continued growing. She was now training facilitators who started their own groups in other cities. Portland had 3 groups. Seattle had 5. Even Cascade Falls had 2 additional groups beyond Margaret's original. Evangeline not only began attending, but became one of the most powerful facilitators. She brought her analytical lawyer mind to the discussions, helping to bridge between mystical experience and rational understanding. Thomas remained skeptical, but respectful. He didn't have his own awakening experiences, but he couldn't deny the positive transformations he witnessed in his mother and sister. On a cold October night, as Margaret prepared for bed, she received an unexpected call. It was Riley, the teenager who had contemplated suicide a year ago. "Margaret," Riley said, her voice full of emotion, "I just wanted you to know. I was accepted to Stanford University with a full scholarship, and my admission essay was about you, about how you saved me and showed me my purpose." Tears filled Margaret's eyes. "Dear, I didn't save you. You saved yourself. I just showed you that you always had the power." "Exactly," Riley laughed. "That's what I wrote in the essay. And now I'm going to study physics and theology, to continue exploring the connection between science and spirituality, because of you." After they hung up, Margaret went out to her porch, as she did every night. The telescope was still there, but covered in dust. She no longer needed lenses to see the stars. She could feel them, connect with them, because now she understood they were made of the same consciousness as her. "Thank you, Robert," she whispered to the stars, knowing he could hear her through the threads. "Thank you for letting me go so I could find this. Thank you for waiting for me on the other side, even knowing that when I arrive, I'll understand there never was an other side to begin with." A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Margaret smiled. She knew it wasn't coincidence. It was Robert saying, "I love you," in the only way he could now. Margaret was 74 years old, but felt ageless. Her body still functioned in 3-dimensional reality, still aged according to the laws of physics, but her consciousness had transcended those limitations. She existed simultaneously as Margaret Holloway, retired teacher from Cascade Falls, Oregon, and as an infinite consciousness experiencing itself through Margaret's form. She didn't know how much longer she would live in this body. It could be 1 year, it could be 20, but it didn't matter. Death had lost its terror, for she now knew it was just a transition, a door between forms of consciousness. And when the time came, she would leave knowing she had fulfilled her mission. The seeds were planted, the awakening had begun, and nothing could stop it now. Humanity was remembering, slowly, person by person, heart by heart, remembering they were divine, remembering they were powerful, remembering they were loved by the universe itself, because they were the universe. Margaret looked at the starry sky one last time that night, sending love through the threads to all the souls still asleep, still suffering, still believing in the illusion of separation. "Awaken," she whispered. "Awaken and remember who you are. Awaken and transform the world. Awaken and live as the gods you have always been." And somewhere, through the vastness of the cosmos, Azariel smiled. The mission was complete. And it was only beginning. If you liked this story, if somehow you identified with something mentioned in the story, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below which part you liked most about this story. Your opinion is very important to us. Until the next video, everyone.